sharing from that place, then we can get that emotional connection. And so I think the resistance is people, first of all, just not knowing that that's what they need to do. Mm-hmm. And they're so used to more formal business language as a way to communicate that in certain, it's almost like a default setting for them, for most organizations. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, let's see if we can get Leanne involved. Leanne, do you have, I think Jeff was suggesting that maybe Skype, if you have Skype open, might be competing with audio for you. So if you have Skype open, close that first. Okay. Yeah, we still don't have audio for you. I'm sorry. I am recording. I stalled on the recording a little bit, people, just so we could get, I wanted to make sure Leanne, we solved her audio issues, but we still don't have audio. So Skype is closed for you, Leanne? It's closed? Okay. Yeah.
I wonder if you could log out and then log back in again.
We'll get her back. Yeah, we'll get her back. But that's such an important point that you're making. And I think it goes back to really having a well-defined character. And so the deeper you can go, and even if you're talking about a customer, it's not enough in the character development to say, the CEO or the CFO. I want to know what keeps her up at night. I want to know what makes her day crazy. Right. I want to know what's at stake if she doesn't solve that issue. What is it at stake? If she doesn't get this thing solved, what about her personal reputation, her credibility, her visibility with the organization? Or maybe it's her business she started, so it's personal. All business is personal because to a business owner, that's your baby. So tell me about those details so that I can identify with the human being and not the title. And we think that a lot of times I've seen clients do this and prospects, and people they think if they just identify a title, the CEO, the CFO, the client, that somehow is character development. No, that's not character development. That's a title. That's a title. And I know. That's all it is. That's all it is.
When I talk about my first, storytelling teacher, it was a guy named Ron Evans who lives up in Saskatchewan, Canada. And I talk about how he came into my graduate department at the University of Pennsylvania. And, he was kind of average height, and he just had on jeans and a white T-shirt, and he had his hair pulled back in a ponytail. And if you looked really closely at his face, you could look like it had been rearranged a few times in a few bar fights.
Oh, no.
But that was Ron. And now all of a sudden people have a picture of that. The name they can relate to. They have, I say, he's from up in Saskatchewan, Canada, so maybe that will bring some other images to someone's mind. Yeah. And if you don't add a few of these little details, not a whole lot, you don't have to go into a long, right? Yeah. But you need to do a little bit of that character development in order to bring the listener in and to have them connect with the people who are a part of the story.
Absolutely.
Can you hear me now?
Yay! Yes! Yay! We're going to give you some love. We're going to give you some love because we're just so excited.
You know what I love about story? It's so unpredictable, just like technology.
Absolutely. It is. But we have you now, and I'm so excited you're back. So what I know you've been listening and around the story challenges and around your own challenges, technology here. But what for you has to be there, Leanne, when you're thinking about what makes a really great business story?
Well, I think, and I agree with what both of you have been talking about. And for me, the audience has to be there when you are creating your story, and that's where the emotional connection comes in. That's where you're kind of finding your place of, will this connect with somebody? Right. And that's how we get over our ego, how we get over our insecurities, how we get over a lot of our own emotional stuff. Is by thinking about how the audience feels, or the person you're going to talk to, identifying their feeling, and really crafting a story around that. And so then you know that you're hitting the right target. You know where you're going with it. So for me, the audience needs to be there, and then you build your story from there. because that's the emotional connection. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, is that they forget that story is supposed to be emotionally connecting.
Yes.
Not just some cool thing that they spend hours writing. So, yeah.
Still doesn't connect.
Yeah, Emma still doesn't connect. Yeah. Well, and that's why I really, and well said. What do you want the audience to feel, to think, to do? What do you want their reaction to be? And that's one of the reasons why I get so frustrated with these really shallow, superficial endings of just the economic layer, because I feel like, all right, well, so maybe you solved a technical challenge or an economic challenge for your buyer, but they're human beings and they don't buy your services because they want to write a check to you. So like, what did that do for them on a very personal level? Like, the human being wants a more emotionally satisfying ending. And that's where, I think, gosh, you've got to take me on that narrative arc of how that person's life has been changed somehow. And that's the one thing that I still, there's so few, I think, business stories that do that well. And it's a shame, because it's there and they can do it. It's there for the taking. They just don't seem to integrate it at that other level,
Right.
It's true.
Another way I talk about it is, what was that person able to do that was extraordinary? Right.
Yeah.
What were they able to accomplish? What were they able to do in their life that they weren't able to do before? And you're just the secondary character, right? You help them along the way.
Well said.
But what happened for them?
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, well said.
Well, that's when we keep coming. It's the overcoming, Kathy, you and I have talked about this a few times too. It's the overcoming. So that journey, it's not just the conflict. It's that you've overcome it. You're on the other side, and you now you can help them.
Right.
So the interest
in it this way,
right? You want to have an interest in helping somebody else in your business story. Call me crazy, but that's kind of the point.
And are you going to go to see this story in the movie theater? I went to the store, I bought some bread, I came home, I made a sandwich.
Right.
Beautiful.
You're not going to pay money to go watch that movie. You're not going to buy that book, right? Because it's just a chain of events, a series of events. And that's how I see a lot of business storytelling happening out there. And as you said earlier, Kathy, it's such a shame that people are leaving money and opportunity on the table because they haven't upped the storytelling game yet.
Yeah, no doubt. And both of you, I think, curated a story actually for the community that I thought was really interesting. And it's something that I've thought about and talked about, but in different words. But it was the idea of, your story is always evolving. It's always one of evolving. And so, I'm a big believer that there is no perfect ending to a story, and everybody wants to tie everything up with the end, and they all lived happily ever after. And it's like, I don't know any businesses where that's true. And I think that this idea of always evolving, and sometimes the story is the journey. It's the journey, and it's not the destination. And so I love it when businesses talk about that. Hey, look, this is where we're going. We're evolving because where we've been no longer serves where we're going and where the market's changed. We're not there yet, but we're in the process of getting there. And your customer, can help us get there. We'd like you to be part of that story. To me, that's a very honest, compelling story. It doesn't have to have the perfect ending. And we don't see enough of those. I know Tom's Shoes has sort of opened that up with the whole, now we're going to start a social fund to fund philanthropy and social entrepreneurship, because we recognize that we can't solve all the world's problems. It has to be we. And, I think that's such an important thing.
I think so.
That's the brand loyalty piece, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that it's no longer, sorry, Karen, to jump on over, but it's the thing is that the purchasing cycle is different now. Yeah. People actually stay with a brand, and we always did. It's not different. We always did. Sears catalog, that was the only catalog we had. And that's where we got our slippers from every single year. But now we have somebody did, I didn't. But it's that thing about now we have so much choice that if you want the customer to continue with you on your journey, it is important for them to be part of it. And I've seen some startups do that well. Like I see FreshBooks has done that very well in terms of continual build, continual infusion stuff. Some of the ones, the entrepreneurial focused ones, are pretty good about keeping you involved in how they're evolving. So I think it's also that nowadays you want people to stick with you, and that's the only way to do that is through your story.
Yeah. Well, that's we should talk about some more elements, right? Some more essential elements.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of two, and one is visual language. And, it's, or another way to say it is the language of the senses. So when you are telling a story, are you giving a few details that sort of trigger the five senses in your listener? For example, we're in Paris. It's a gorgeous spring day. White puffy clouds, gorgeous blue skies. But it's that early part of spring, that kind of a day where you can smell that new growth that's happening and yet still feel that chill in the air. Now everybody can relate to that, pretty much. And it's just dropping in a few of those details, right? Or, right, this person, this beggar was sitting next to a coffee shop, right, with a bell above the door. And it was a coffee and pastry shop, and people were in and out, all the time. And you're stimulating in the listener, oh, maybe I'll hear a bell, or maybe I'll smell that coffee. Maybe I'll smell the pastries. Maybe I will hear the footsteps of people as they're going in and out of the shop. And what that does is when you can give these visual or sensory triggers, then your listener becomes immediately engaged in the story. And it becomes their own because their imagination is kicked in, and now they're filling in all of the details from their own memory. And that's there's a huge treasure trove of connection and influence there that's happening.
That is such a great point, because we don't, in business storytelling, a lot of, B2B can be, it aims for the head. It misunderstands and it aims for the head. And that is rather than the heart and the other senses. But you make such an important point, because when you fill in that visual language, you've got the sense of, I see it, I feel it. I don't understand it. It's not an intellectual exercise. It takes it into a feeling. And that is such an important way to transport a story. Yeah.
Oh, it really is. And to speak to what we see a lot in business, it's a little drier, and they're sort of just getting that analytical part of our brain. But we know that the real value of storytelling is that it's a whole brain, whole body experience. And so why not really go down that road? Because then you get full engagement from your listeners. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, and can I ask you, Karen? I wanted to ask you, because I'm thinking that it's that kind of visual detail, and that the kind of nice connection with all your senses. Isn't that the thing that cues us to it being a story rather than something else? That's our first clue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And I think it becomes more important when you're setting up the context of the story. Because then if you can do it right in the beginning, then you get your audience immediately engaged. And then as you go along, you can sprinkle little triggers here and there. You don't have to go in as much detail, but because they are already engaged. And so, it's pretty powerful.
It is really powerful. There's no question. And I remember years ago, and I think Leanne and I chatted about this at one point, and there was a story for a business I was working with, and I really wanted to humanize the issue that they were dealing with, which was, they had to downsize, and they were like a family. And when you have to fire people for no other reason than economics, not because they did anything wrong, you hurt. That's your family. And they wanted to, well, sanitize the story. Well, it's one of economics. And I'm like, blah, you can't do that. I want to tell the story because that CEO built that business and it was very personal to him. It was family. And he was to the point of tears when he had to decide who to lay off. And I wanted to tell the story of sweat dripping down his brow, of his eyes welling up and tearing, because that is a personal thing that people who run businesses feel. It's visceral. We've all had to make really painful, hard economic decisions. And don't sanitize it and make it I have to, like as if you're chopping off your arm and it's no big deal, but and yet it's funny because, there are voices in the company that go, oh, we can't do that. That's too personal. We can't write that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You have to be able to show that you do care and that this is a hurt. This is not a feel good story. This is we have to do what we have to do. And it's personal to me. And right. I won that battle, but I'll tell you, it felt a little bit like the Hunger Games, trying to make that case. And in the end, I think it worked and it was the right thing to do. But it gets to your point of visual language, because now all of a sudden it's not, I gotta lay people off. It's, the brow was, his brow was, sweat was dripping off his brow. His eyes welled up to the point of tears. He had to lay off members of his family. And that's where the story started. How much, you can feel that difference is palpable.
And that's a great example, Kathy. And, the thing that I wanted to say to add to that is that this is not just a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
It's actually, there's a key business result that comes from this, which is people empathize with the decision you've made. Yeah. They may still disagree with it. They may still be upset with it. But the fact that they can feel your empathy and they can understand the decision, you're in a whole other ball of wax when you're impersonal about these kinds of decisions. We're laying you off. Like up here in Canada, Goodwill just shut its doors and left a note on the door saying we're closed. And there's a whole financial problem, the whole lots of things. But the problem is they didn't tell anybody why. They've treated their employees badly. They haven't shared with their employees what was going to happen. Like it was handled very, very badly. And so now, in terms of people wanting to donate to them if they open again, anybody wanting to work with them. So it's also that story I would guess would have really helped the business result, which was painless as possible for as many people as possible.
Right.
And that's why I like that example, because it shows that humanity helps business. It's not an add-on. It's not it helps.
Right.
Absolutely. No question about it. No question.
Yeah. It goes back to your original point, Kathy, that storytelling is a human experience. And it is about sharing our humanity. And if we're not doing that, then we're not telling stories.
Yeah, we're sure not. And and this is sort of, out of the realm of sort of the nonprofit world. But when I think about, just to extend what we're talking about here. The Super Bowl is upon us and it's in my backyard, almost literally, because I'm in Silicon Valley and very close to Levi Stadium. And, the stories that are emerging about, how the NFL has treated merchants in San Francisco. Basically, get away, go away. We're taking over this area. Instead of partnering with the local merchants where the merchants make their living from selling merchandise. And maybe they could have partnered with the NFL to create memorable T-shirts and mugs and all that stuff. They actually told those merchants gave them like a week's notice, get out. We're taking over this part of San Francisco. And I'm thinking to myself, that kind of story, boy, that's a horrible story. And it's one where, what about the empathy and compassion? I mean, this is where's the NFL comes in and it looks like a bully, and it looks like a bully who kind of comes in and throws its money around and does whatever it wants. And then near me, there was a soccer field behind Levi Stadium where kids used to go play soccer. And the NFL said, if you don't move your kids playing soccer, and some of these kids have no other place to play, we're going to sue. So the city of Santa Clara rolled over and said, okay. And I thought to myself, what a story nightmare, where the opposite, if the NFL had come in and handled this with in a human way, my gosh, it could have been very different. So if you ask a lot of the people locally what they think of the way that this whole thing has been handled, people are not happy. People have a very kind of like, wow, reaction to it.
So what I hear both of you saying is that, first of all, we have to get strategic with our storytelling.
Absolutely.
Which is getting our heads on straight around storytelling first, before you can even figure out what story to craft, right?
Yes.
And once we get our heads on straight around storytelling, then figuring out the story to tell and how you want to tell it becomes a lot easier. Is that a fair statement?
I think you nailed it. I think it's really being strategic about how you're going to think about story and what does story mean to you? What stories do you have to tell? And so when this gets back to the conversation we were having at the beginning of the blab, which was, Karen and I were checkling and people say, well, how do you make a good story? What are the elements? The elements are important, but they're not as important as your intent. The audience, right. What do you want them to walk away with? And unless you know those things, going through a simple checklist becomes tactically meaningless. And it's not going to support the larger, why am I telling it? Who am I telling it to? What do I want them to feel? And I think people just want in Silicon Valley, everybody wants an app for that. Where's the app? Where's the storytelling app for that?
Right.
Well,
I kind of liken that to paint by numbers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Here, the checklist, I checked off all the elements. Do I have all the right elements in there? That's kind of like a paint by numbers. But when what are you saying, Leanne?
Oh, no, we lost you. Lost your audio. Uh-oh.
Okay.
She'll come back.
Yeah. So getting your head on straight first around storytelling, and then knowing the essential elements that you need to include in the story, the combination together is what will make a really good story.
Absolutely.
But if you leave either one of those off, it's not going to turn out very well.
Agreed. I don't care what checklist you're following. You got to know the intent and purpose and the checklist. But let's talk about, because I like to give people tangible examples. I think people can get their arms around it a little bit, and I know you do as well. And so if you think about businesses that are doing a great job of storytelling, what comes to mind for both of you, Leanne and Karen? Who do you think of?
Well, I think of Patagonia and I think of Nike.
Yeah.
And who else? Who else would you add?
I have to say I'm impressed with Intel lately. I think Intel has done a much better job of telling that story and of who they are and celebrating not themselves, but the innovations they help power, because they are a part of something bigger. And I think that's really important. And they're doing a great job. And actually, IBM's gotten so much better in the last 5-6 years. I'd say they've done an amazing job of really smarter planet. It's not us. We're just part of the technology in a larger system, like that delivers smart grid or, better air traffic control or whatever the thing is. We're part of that larger thing. And I think that's a really important thing. And passion for story. Thank you. Yeah. Airbnb. I think Airbnb does a great job with their blog. Belong anywhere. Belong anywhere. That's a really human story of freedom and mobility and aspiration to travel. I think those are really, really great companies that have done a good job.
And Google has great stories that they share about how customers use their products and the difference it makes in their they're really great. What I love about Intel is that they are actually sharing stories about something that's invisible, something we will never see.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If they can do it, just think what we can do with our own tangible, invisible products and services.
Yeah. There's no question. And I love that they've shifted from the focus of themselves to the we. And it's to your point that you really want to tell a great story. Tell how you made your customer achieve something amazing. And so by they're the Batman. You can be the Robin, but you're still going to look good because of that, helping them accomplish that goal. And that's where I think it also needs to shift. And it's starting to happen with Intel. And when I see big companies get it and move towards that, I go, they're getting it. They're getting it.
Right. And, Kiva, the microfunding site, has told stories since the very beginning of since the organization was founded. They were very deliberate about sharing stories, and they were also very conscientious about the kinds of stories that they knew that they needed to tell. And they knew that every story that they told had to build respect for the people who were receiving these microloans. And they have done a phenomenal job with that. And I think that keeping respect in the back of our minds as something that we always want to build into our stories and storytelling is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sally, you want to join us? Let's bring Sally on. We've got somebody, and see if bring Sally on.
Hey, Sally.
Yay!
Hello.
Sally. Hi, Sally. How are you? Oh,
we lost your sound.
We don't have any audio for you, Sally. We got no audio.
Can you hear me now, Kathy?
I can. Yes. Yay.
Yes, I'm back. Okay, thanks. Blab doesn't like me.
Yay. No.
Hi,
Yeah.
Sally.
Hi, Sally. We can see you. We just can't hear you. But you look great. I know. We'll get Sally.
We'll come back.
We'll come back to her. Are there any other examples, Leanne? You think about storytelling, as Karen and I were talking about it, of companies that stick out in your mind, really telling some different kinds of stories that stand out for you.
The airlines. I don't know that you talked about the airlines. There's a couple, WestJet here in Canada. You've got British Airways. I mean, I don't know that you've seen the British Airways stories. They are all about connection.
Yeah.
So often they're talking about, families that live far apart. You have a big Indian population over in England, and there are a number of beautiful, beautiful stories about families who are not able to connect or not able to get together, and they bring them together, and it raises the level of why they exist. It's not just to get on a plane and get upgraded if you can. It actually is, there's a lot more to it. And same with WestJet. They do in Canada, they're employee owned. And so how they bring that story to life, or how they bring that to life with story, is their employees plan kind of sometimes practical jokes. Often they're kind of really nice practical jokes. Like they'll buy everybody on the plane. They'll ask them at the beginning of the flight what they want for Christmas.
I saw
Christmas
that.
Time. Have you seen that one?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Things like that.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah, and so it's a great example. But the piece is that they're owned by employees, and so their stories all relate to being employee driven and what fun it is, and what a great place it is to work. So those really tight, nice stories that they know what the values are and the emotional connection they want to create, and so then they bring them to life. But they remain consistent, and I think that's the piece, because I've seen some brands, and can't think of one at the moment, but sometimes they're just kind of all over the place. They keep telling stories, but you're not sure what they're trying to do.
Or
so
they
consistency.
Consistency is an important point, because we talked about this, I think, last time. It's like I used to have such love, and I still sort of do, for a Chipotle, but I think they missed an opportunity to really get ahead of the story when this whole thing went down. They did not jump in and get in front of that train, and they should have really handled this whole outbreak in a different way, because it wasn't consistent with the story about who they were, I think.
Right. That's right. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they could have just said, like there's the whole thing about fresh local food. Yeah. They could have stuck to their story and said, I'm sorry. Right. We try to source it. We made a mistake or whatever. It would have actually not been that hard to get that credibility back. But now they haven't got it, because they're still not owning it, right?
They're not owning it. And I think So the story is only as good as, and we're talking about storytelling. Storytelling is important, but it's only as good as you back it up. And, so much emphasis is on the story. And I think this is really not only strategic intent for your story and the stories you're going to tell and the checklist, but the culture that supports it and the culture that says, yes, this is who we are. And we're going to make sure that if we say that we care about local sourcing and purity of food and all these different things, that becomes our focus. And no matter what, we're going to address it.
That's right.
We're going to do that. And that's a big one. Yeah. A great story is a great story. But
can you hear?
Yeah. Well, and Sally. I don't know whether you guys talked about it. Is Sally there?
Can you hear me?
Yay!
Hi, Sally. How exciting. Thank you.
Hi, Sally. What you got going on, Sally? What do you think of who's doing a great job in business storytelling? Who are you liking these days?
Well, I want to tell you a story about the client I worked with in India in December, because they totally inspired me. And what I came away from that experience was the possibility of having a corporation where the internal values, the kind that you nurture through organizational development, and the brand values were actually consistent. And then in the case of this one corporation, their fundraising, their corporate social responsibility values fit alongside. So what was really cool was when I went in and asked people to tell their stories, I started hearing stories. I mean, it wasn't like give me the party line, but they would be giving me these stories that would fit in to the picture. Whether I talked with a manager in automotive or in tractors or in real estate, they had very personal stories that fit right in with the brand and the values. And I thought that to me was sort of the essence of what a corporate culture could do with story. If you could integrate the inside and the outside, because I think we've all known, and Leanne, you have plenty of examples of places where the outside story was glorious, but you talk to people inside and you go,
that's right. It's true.
That's
so true.
That is truth. I think we just attended church in some way, shape, or form here, because that was true. Yeah, no, it's so true. It's what you're saying, Sally, is so important. And I remember talking to a big company in Silicon Valley not too long ago, and they kind of shifted gears, and employees are not happy. And, they're like, well, what do you think of the tagline? I'm like, doesn't matter what I think. You work here. What do you folks think? And they said, it's horrible. And I was like, that's not good, because when you have that gap between who the employees think they are and what the company is saying out to the outside world, boy, that's a dangerous place to have a big gap. That is a very scary thing. Your story's out of alignment, right?
I once worked with quote, the world's leading engineering organization, and I would go in, because they were government, I would go in and every clock on the wall would be different. You wouldn't know actually what the time was when you were there. And I'm going, this is the world's leading engineering organization. Talk about a disconnect. They actually had a building. They had a building where a couple of employees had umbrellas over their desks because it leaked. And so,
oh my God.
I'm talking
Oh no. Oh, that's not good. That's not good. Oh my goodness.
But imagine the stories. The stories would be rife. There'd be a lot of stories going on. Not ones they'd want, but
I have
a lot
a question
there.
Which risks taking things in a different direction, but so tell me if it's on point. But I am going to be talking to fundraisers about using story, the development officers. And I know that there are a lot of pictures of the kid with the cleft palate, and the woeful smile.
No.
What's our message to the fundraising world?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. It is a good question. And so let's address it for everybody. Let's shift over. Thank you, Sally. Let's talk about maybe nonprofit and cause storytelling. Let's talk about that. So Sally brings up a great point, because it can feel very exploitative. So what's the answer? What's your reaction to that? I kind of saw visually.
Mine is stop it right now. Stop it.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. Sorry, I'll just quickly say. Here's the thing is that, and when I do my workshops with nonprofits, I always talk about in the 1980s when we saw Live Aid. What pictures did we see? And every single person in the room can picture the same thing, right? young Black children with distended stomachs with flies, right? And what I say is, if in the 30 years since then,
right,
that story has not changed, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And so, you know, like, it is not okay to keep telling, and it is exploitative. We have a, you know, there's a doctor here who she's done War Child, and she calls it charity porn.
Yes.
Because it's actually exploitative. Yeah. Because what we want is the inspiring, how did you help stories.
Yeah, I agree.
Same as business, actually. It's the same thing. Like, if I'm going to give you my money, how are you going to make a difference? So that would be my thing. So Karen, sorry, I talked over.
Well, you know, I talk about it in terms of compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
And all of those images do is create fatigue, compassion fatigue in your audience. You're not going to really get very far. And I agree with Leanne that, and it also goes back to what I said earlier about these stories have to build respect. And whenever I work with nonprofits, that's what we work on. And also how did you actually help them? And again, what was the difference that you made to someone's life? You know, in other words, what were they able to accomplish because you helped them along?
Right.
And that's the real story. Not the story how much trouble people are in.
Yeah.
It's they're able to do with your help. And that's what raises.
And it's not, And I just want to add to that. It's not the organization story.
That's right.
This is the big, you've got to be really careful. It is not the organization being the hero jumping in and doing this to this person, so therefore their life is better. Well, it is the story of the person who utilized whatever services were given to make their life better.
That's a very important story. That's a very important point, because in fact, I was talking about this fairly recently, about this concept of sort of the savior story. And that is a double-edged sword. The whole charity story, not just the charity porn pictures, and I totally agree with what you're saying. I have a visceral reaction to that too, but it's also this idea that, and this is where when Charity Water first started, they were heavily criticized because they came in with on the white stallion, we're going to save the day. And that double-edged sword of we're the heroes, we're the knights in shining armor, it basically eviscerated a lot of the local NGOs that were already on the ground working on the water in all these different places. And what it ignored was the partner. We need other people to bring this vision to reality. So so when you focus on, look at all the good we do, you do risk alienating, because then you become, you know, that sort of, I call it finding your content Jesus. And it's a little bit alienating, right? Because it's like you're not the savior.
Well, you're reminding me of another thing that's going on here that I think is really, really critical to identify. And that is the difference between the nonprofit telling the story of what happened in someone's life and the person who received those services.
Yes.
That person being able to tell that story. And what I see a lot in the nonprofit world is, here, let me tell your story the way I think it should be told. A little problematic there.
Yeah.
And instead of working with the person who received those services and helping them tell their story of what they were able to overcome because you helped. And I think until that shifts, we're going to see some of these, I don't know if they're kind of ethical problems, I think, where we're telling somebody else's story without giving them voice.
It's such a great, I agree. That is so, oh my gosh, we're all in agreement because it's such an important point. You just hit on something really, really super important, because it is important to make sure that they're in control of the story, telling it the way that they perceived it and experienced it. It's credible, and we should not be sort of, gosh, we got to make sure it's consistent with our brand. No, let them tell it in the way that they need to tell it. That's true and honest for them. And also too, a lot of it can't. So it's the whole shift from give us money to here's how far we've come. These are the people we've helped. But you know what? No, let them tell you that story. Let them tell you what this meant to them.
Right.
And that's such a big shift.
Devil's advocate on this just a little bit, because I think
Sure,
I'm totally on board with get the real stories from the people who are the real heroes, who are the people receiving the services, who have made use.
Yeah.
And all. But the two things that come to mind, one, I'm working with an organization where I don't know that their clients can actually go up and tell their stories. It's personal, it's confidential, it's service. You know, it's like it's edgy. Maybe 6 years later they'll be able to tell, but right now they can't. The other thing I thought is, you know, in a community, there are a lot of really noble stories about this organization helped me and I found my way. But the dimension I'm wondering about is, how do you tell sort of the strategic story about your organization? And is your fundraising story just the noble services that have empowered someone in a real way, told the best way through the voices of your people? Or is there another layer of story that we want to bring in that gives a context for our work, or places it in a ecosystem that doesn't make it all just about me? You know, do you get my question? It's sort of like, is there another tier?
Well,
sort of
I think
I would say absolutely. However, I would say the challenge is, if your individual stories do not connect to your strategic story, you ain't got a story.
Right.
So the thing is, if you're if you're serving someone, this is the thing about nonprofits, and this is where story doesn't just start at the end, right? It doesn't just start, tell me your story and how we helped you.
Right.
If we're serving people, it starts at the very beginning. Tell me your story. What's happening for you, so we can find the right service for you.
Right.
So that we can help you along. How are you doing now? And then how did you get on? And then a year later, what changed? And so what we do is we forget to include the customer, the consumer, the client in the development of our story. So yes, Sally, there is a bigger story, but I would argue that you have your founder story, the why it got set up. So that's a big strategic story. But if it's 30 years later, it's not quite good enough. You have to refresh it or renew it, as Karen and I had a great conversation about. But for me, how you help, it is really simple. Your big strategic story is how you help. What difference, what impact do you make in the world? And then if you're, like I say, you can check on that all the time by your individual stories. Because if the people's lives aren't changing, because you don't just ask them their stories for branding purposes.
Yeah, well,
it's evaluation. Did I help? And if you haven't, you need to check the story you're telling.
Karen looks like you get
Karen, because I still a piece on this.
So I want to address the earlier part of Sally's question, which can you actually have people who've been through some horrendous times actually share their story? And for the past 3 years, I've been working with foster youth who have been emancipated from the system, and helping them tell their stories at fundraising events. And this organization that I work with, that's most of what they do, is they allow these young people a voice and allow them to tell their story. And I'm just privileged that I get to help them with that. But here's the tricky part. Some people are more resolved with their stories than others. And so that doesn't mean that if you're unresolved somewhat with your story, in other words, it's still painful, it's still difficult for you to tell, that doesn't mean you can't tell it. It just means that you have to find a different way to tell it that fits where you are at that particular time. And I've worked with some young people who said, no, I don't want to share any real personal details. And I go, okay, great, that's fine, right? Because my job is not to re-traumatize them. And that can easily happen. My job is to help them find the place where they can share what they want to share and have a voice. And so that takes a bit of work, but it really does work. And then the people who are more resolved with their stories, then they have a lot to say, and it's just a matter of, okay, how are you going to share it in 5 to 7 minutes? So then the other thing I have to do in the back end is teach the people a little story aikido. And what I mean by that is after they share a story, and we all know this as professionals in the field, we know that once you share a story, it sparks a story in someone else and they want to share that with you. Or one of these young people has been up on the podium, shared their story, and somebody in the audience gets activated, right? Because of that. So they'll come up and they'll start asking very personal questions. If they mentioned abuse in the story, then they want to know exactly what happened. Tell me about the abuse. And that's very, invasive. And so what I tell these people that I work with, these young folks, is, well, hey, some people, they're not, they may sound rude, but what happened for them is actually you touched them in some way. And they don't know how to express it. And the only way that they know how to express it is to ask an invasive question. So your job is not to answer that, right? Because that's where everybody gets all flustered. Oh, no, I don't want to answer anybody's questions after I talk, And I say, no, you don't have to answer any questions. That's not a requirement, right? But what you can say is to that person who asks you an invasive question, oh, well, it seems that my story somehow touched you in some way. So in what way did it touch you? And ask them the question in return so that you can get them to talk. Mm-hmm. And that's what I call kind of story aikido. It takes the whole pressure off. But these are things that we very seldom talk about when we work with these kinds of populations in the storytelling world and in the nonprofit world, or particularly around fundraising.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
That's a great. I love that. I do want to move on actually because we've got 3 more minutes left. We do, and this is fun. There's so much fun. I just want to kind of keep it to a little bit on track so we can be mindful of everybody's time. And I wish we had more time. I think those are great answers, actually. But I want to, in the time that we have left, and we have like two minutes here, maybe 3 minutes. What's one piece of advice? So we've talked about a lot of stuff. Your strategic intent, your audience centricity, the checklist of things that have to be there, your character, your resolution, your problem. All these things have to be there. And we've talked about, which I think, thank you, Sally, for bringing up the issue of nonprofit and cause storytelling, because that's a very important thing as well. So if I could ask just kind of one final thing, what's your final thought that you would leave? Like, what's one thing that you just want people to take away from this? Karen, we'll start with you.
Oh yeah. My favorite, most essential element to a story is building in strong contrast between light and dark, hot and cold, high and low, these big contrasts that we can build into the story, because that's what actually creates drama in the story.
Yeah. How about you, Leanne?
Mine is start with your outcome, your strategic intent, call to action.
Yes.
Don't leave them hanging. You need to, that's the tidy up bow part. It's not the facts or the story stuff. It's the actual, what do you want your audience to do next? If they don't know, they're going to go away mad or sad. So you need to tell them what you want them to do.
Yeah, agreed. And for me, it always comes back to, I think, if I could leave, I'm gonna say 2 things. It really does come back to character development. Don't skimp on it. It really is the human connective tissue that allows people to see themselves in your story. Stories are fundamentally about identity and belonging. So make sure that that's fleshed out. And then I would just say, make sure that the narrative arc is there, to Leanne's point. People want to know. People want to know what the real human ending is. So that's such an important part of it as well. And then I want to make sure I read this last comment here. When I try to get at comments here, someday I want to ask you how nonprofits might come together to create a common story so they don't all end up competing together. God, that is such a beautiful question. And you know what? That would be. Let's do that on our next blab. Let's make it a topic. for the next, because it's a beautiful,
that'd be great.
It's a beautiful question, and I thank you for it. And unfortunately, we don't have time, and I want to honor everybody's time. But let's do that for the next one. So thanks everybody for joining. Sally, I'm so glad you could join us.
Yeah, that was great fun to pop in. Thank you so much.
Yes, and Leanne, thanks
for hosting.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And Karen and everybody joining us. Thank you. Next time we'll talk about this. Bye everybody.
Bye everybody. Bye. Thank you.